Welcome to the Realizations Podcast. I'm Andrea Gordon, your host, and I'm excited to explore the world of real estate with you. In a world where perceptions often overshadow reality, Realizations seeks to redefine what it means to be a realtor. Join me as we peel back the layers of the industry, uncovering inspiring stories and celebrating the good in real estate. Whether you're a homeowner, a fellow realtor, or simply curious, this podcast is for you. Welcome to Realizations, where perceptions meet reality. Let's dive right in. Welcome, everyone, to the Realizations Podcast. I'm here today with one of my very favorite agents, Julie Gardner. She works with me at Compass, but I have known her for probably, maybe 20 years or something at this point. And she's always been one of my idols. So I thought I'd love to share her with all of you. So hello, Julie. How are you?
I'm good, Andrea. Yes, and it has been 2 decades.
Yes. So tell me a little bit about you for the audience here. I know about you, but they don't. How did you get into real estate? What matters to you about real estate?
So I'm one of 6 kids. I grew up in Sacramento in the Valley. My dad was a broker, and he very early on decided that he liked to buy little fixers, and he had this whole crew of children, and we all learned how to paint and wallpaper, mow lawns, and lay sprinkler systems. I started doing that at about the age of 12. I was never going to go into real estate as a result of that. And I went off to Great America, and I became a professional dancer down in LA. And I did that until I was old at the age of 25. Moved back up north and went into the design field, calling on architects and designers, and did that and had my own business, and then segued into motherhood. And then I started fixing up my own houses. We were living in San Francisco, my husband and I. He is an attorney who represents the indigent on death row. And so we didn't have a lot of money. And we were buying fixers in San Francisco, but we were living in them. And then we would fix them, and then we would sell them. And so we did that for about 12 years and went through 5 houses, and then moved over to Piedmont with the money that we had created in that little bank. And then he turned to me and said, I don't plan on moving every 2 to 3 years. So you're going to need to renew your license and do it for other people. And so that's what I did. And that was over 20 years ago. And I've been happily ensconced in the field of real estate ever since, and have really found it rewarding.
So you are in Piedmont, and you specialize in Piedmont, which, for those of you who don't know, is one of the toniest neighborhoods in all of the Bay Area. Beautiful, exquisite, big houses that are definitely trophies in many, many ways. What's an average price point in Piedmont at this point?
It's about 3.2, get you a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house in the center of town. I used to joke that 3.2 is the new 2.7. So we've enjoyed nice, nice home values that have maintained and stayed. And like everybody else, went kind of crazy during COVID. And then we're now at pre-COVID levels again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's just marvelous. And how many transactions occur in Piedmont annually, do you think?
About 130 occur in Piedmont annually. It's a small little hamlet of only about 10,000 residents, 4,000 homes, and in any given year, about 130 of those homes trade.
And there are about 3 or 4 of you that actually do pretty much all of the business there.
We do a fair amount of the business. Yeah, there's 3 or 4 of us, but there's, there are some teams that dominate, and we're lucky to be one of those teams.
Now, talking about that, you have a teammate at this point, Sarah Abel, who is also just aces. How did you two choose to team up, and how long have you known one another, and what's the genesis of that?
Yeah, that was almost by accident. We had both joined Compass from different companies. I went on vacation, and she covered me while I was gone. And then when I returned, she went on vacation, and I covered her while she was gone. And what we discovered was that we had very, very similar work ethics and ethos. And it was really nice to have somebody that you could count on And it allowed us to create a little balance in our work life, work home life, which, real estate is 24/7, as you know.
Mm.
And it's demanding, and it's, sort of the joke that, oh, you go into real estate and you think that you can work your own hours, when in fact you're working everybody else's hours, right? You're
Correct.
working when they're available, which is often on the weekends and after 5 o'clock at night. And so it just was sort of great to have somebody that you could pass the ball to. And as a result, we teamed up. I, at that point, already had my sister working for me as my project manager and sort of team leader. And we were a package deal. And then very shortly thereafter, Sarah's daughter graduated college and joined us and does all of our tech stuff. So we're just a tiny little team of 4 with Sarah and I at the lead. And we're a little cottage industry at this point. A little family.
That is
Family
that
thing.
is that is so cool. I love your sister, and you guys are twins.
We're twins. That's right.
Do people very often get you guys mixed up when
No, not anymore. No. But it is great to have somebody who has your back. And then oftentimes when people will say, you'll get on these calls with the other realtors and they'll kind of complain that their team, what you can't teach is a work ethic, right? That's a hard thing
correct?
to teach. And they wish they could clone themselves. And I always joke that, well, in fact, I did clone myself. Sorry. Sorry for all you singletons out there, but it's
So for you, having a teammate created work-life balance,
yeah.
and also, you're both work beautifully. You're both extremely. Do you need to stop for a sec?
Nope, I'm good. Just, yeah,
Okay.
I'll just walk in the room.
I'll
Okay.
count down again. Three,
Yep.
2, 1. You both have a phenomenal work ethic, and I've always appreciated that about you. I've always really appreciated how honest and open and transparent, and no subterfuge of any kind in dealing with you as an agent. It's always been a complete pleasure for me. I don't understand when people are not like that in the business, but there are people that are not like that in the business.
Yes, and I refer to them as secret agents, and I don't really understand their role in real estate at all. I mean, I come from a win-win value system, and so I think that everybody should feel they gave a little and got a little, and you walk away from the table and everybody got a fair shake. And
Yep.
when people are not upfront with you and not honest with you going into the transaction, it's not going to improve during the course of escrow. So I
Correct.
really prefer the agent who calls me up and says, hey, I've got the perfect buyer for your house and here's who they are and they love it and we'll be writing. And then that that's how it's going to follow through. And
Right.
that's also how I work my own practice. I just don't see any reason. I'm not a poker player in that sense, right? I don't see the
Right.
reason to hide my cards, hold things close to the vest. I'm going to negotiate on behalf of my clients, certainly.
Mhm.
But I don't see any reason to do it secretively.
I totally agree with you. And I'll tell you this, as kind of a big listing agent myself, I kind of get upset when people throw an offer in at the last moment when haven't even ever heard from them, don't
That
know who they are, have no idea what their client is like, have no idea whether they've even seen the place or not. It's actually really good to communicate with your fellow agents and make sure that they know who you are, because that's the mark of a man or a woman, is how you present to the other person out in the world and how you are with your colleagues. It will really, really help you to create a relationship with the people that you work with.
Yeah.
And for example, Julia and me, I just love her. I think she's awesome. She could
Thank
do anything, and I would be like, that's the real deal. And another question I have for you.
I
Um,
just stop you for 1 second, and I'll tell you that years ago when I was working at the Grub Company, an agent took me aside and said to me, the most important relationships you're going to have in real estate are with your other agents because you are going to see them over and over again. And the
yep,
client that you're fighting so hard for is going to move on, right? And whether or not they're loyal to you is another conversation. But
right.
the next time you're at the table, it may be that you now have the buyer for that agent's house, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes you're representing the buyer, sometimes you're representing the seller, but you're going in front of, you and I have done several transactions together over the years, right? And I always know that I can count on you and it's going to go smoothly and we're going to both work. I mean, everybody's on the same side of the page in terms of we're all working to close the transaction. We all want a
Exactly.
successful close of escrow, including the
Exactly.
seller, including the buyer. It's in all of our best interests to work together. And so I
Exactly.
loved that bit of advice and I've heeded it. Came from Mindy Scott, by the way. You're gonna be in front of those agents over and over again, protect those relationships more than anything else.
She's another one that's quite lovely,
Yeah.
and her daughter too.
Yep.
So you are the columnist for a newspaper. What would you call it? A periodical? What do you call it?
No, I'm not a columnist for a paper. I'm a blogger. I'm a weekly
There we
blogger.
go.
Yep.
There you
And
go.
I write the Piedmont Perspective, and I started it probably 18 years ago. And it's proven to be a lovely touchstone and a bit of therapy for me along the way as I look at all of those issues week after week after week. And it's just
Yep.
the story of one agent in the trenches and what happens. And we're all in the trenches. I mean, anybody
Yeah.
who's successful at this business is in the trenches and they're scrappy and they're working and they're showing up and they're doing all of that stuff. And we all have a million stories to tell. And I wanted to tell those stories. And so that's what the blog does.
And when you're working on your blog, how do you come up with your subject matter?
Well, there's a lot, right? There's a lot.
There's so much you can choose from.
There's no, yeah, there's a lot to choose from. It's kind of funny. I have little post-it notes all around my computer that are just one-liners and they just start me off and they sit there until something ferments and sometimes it's really quickly and sometimes it's slowly, but I managed to put one out every week and I've written almost 800 at this point.
You're amazing. I mean, I'm the columnist for Berkeley Hills Living and for Montclair Living, but I only have to do it once a month. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine doing it every single week because I'm
Yeah.
always like racking my brain for subject matter because you don't want to always be talking about the same sorts of things, and you manage to vary it so much, and you also are quite a wonderful writer. What
I
is
appreciate that. I mean, although people will say to me, how do you come up with 800 different things to write about? And I often say I don't, right? I do come up with the same things to write about. They're just wrapped a little differently. But when we're talking about real estate, it's hope, it's fear, right?
Mhm.
It's all of the
Mhm.
sort of the emotions around buying real estate because real
Right.
estate is a very emotional transaction. And so I'm really just dealing with human emotions, but I'm wrapping them each time in a different story. That's it.
And given all of that, I'm going to go a little bit into just prognostications. For me, 2024 was not an awesome year. It was a very difficult, challenging year.
Yeah.
Seemed like people were meaner. There was less kindness. Things were harder. And also, I was statistically backed up. We've had probably the lowest volume of sales in the last 30 years, I heard. What do you think is going to happen? And nobody will hold you to this in 2025. What do you think is
I
the
agree
next?
with you that things were tougher and that people were less kind. And I think that's a reflection of our society as a whole. And without getting political around it, I don't see that the new president is going to change the landscape of how we interact with one another as human
Right.
beings. And so, I mean, I very rarely ever write anything political. I did write a piece that sort of said, where is human kindness in
Yeah.
all of this, right?
Yeah.
Because it's people are less civil to one another, and that's at every level. That's just at
Yep.
every level. And I don't know how we change that discourse. I think the horse has left the barn, and I don't know
Mhm.
that it's going to change. And I don't think it's going to change while we have this administration in place. Sadly, we've been there before, and it doesn't get better. And I think this time there don't appear to be any guardrails. So I can't imagine that things are going to get better. I think that's part of it. The other part of it was that COVID set very unrealistic expectations for people. I mean, we joked that we were all going to be driving for Uber when COVID first started and we were shut down,
Right.
and it did
Right.
just the opposite, right? It
Right.
proved to be the perfect storm for real estate.
Hmm.
I mean, people needing their houses to work differently and wanting to move and having interest rates that were 3% or sub 3%. we're not going to see those interest rates again.
No.
And so it is going to cost people more to buy. And then we're going to add insurance to that, right? Which has
Hmm.
doubled or gone up fourfold in the last year. And that's made it more expensive to buy. And so it's stressful. And I mean, I have young adults, children, and honestly don't know how they'll ever be able to afford to buy in California. And the
Right.
truth is nobody promises them a house in California, but it's a kind of a bitter pill to swallow that it's just gotten so expensive that your own family can't afford to live here, and they can't.
Right. My own property taxes are over $20,000 a year.
That's right, mine too,
My
right?
insurance at this point is up close to $18,000 a year. Now
Right,
that includes our cars and what have you, but the reality is it is literally 4 times as expensive as it used to be.
that's right.
Um, and in Piedmont, have you been finding the same sorts of problems that we've been having with insurance in the Berkeley Hills and in the Montclair
Not as
Hills?
bad as in the hills, not as bad as, I mean, Montclair has really suffered as a result. I'm
Mhm.
sure Berkeley Hills has as well. And so
Yeah,
those values have dropped on those properties because it's a lot more expensive to carry them.
yeah.
And we used to always talk about, it wasn't so much about the cost to buy, it was the
Hmm.
cost to hold and carry. And
Hmm.
that PITI, that little I, that was your insurance at the end of it, is now a great big capital I.
Yep.
So, right, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, it's huge. And so, yeah, it's more expensive for sure. Now, you're right, I'm in a fairly affluent community. And for many of these people, it doesn't matter, right?
Hmm.
Carry the extra cost, but for younger buyers, it matters a great deal. So
Hmm.
it's getting harder to buy, not easier. And frankly, I don't see that changing because builders aren't building for these starter families.
Right. I just was talking with an attorney from San Diego earlier today, and she deals in commercial loans and leases for very large scale projects, so not residential. And she basically said that all that building has essentially stopped,
Yeah.
and that the fear is that with this potential tariff situation that could be caused by the incoming administration,
Sure.
that materials are going to become so absurdly expensive that it will really, really damage the building industry further.
And I think she's right. And when we looked at COVID and we had supply chain issues, right? And it was very, very expensive and everything went up. Well, guess what? It didn't go down a whole lot when the supply chain issues
Yeah,
loosened up, right? I mean,
yeah.
drywall's still expensive and nails are still expensive and steel's expensive. And for these builders, I think it's difficult.
Hmm.
So yeah, no, I think they were saying that they were hoping that Trump's policies were going to loosen up investments. But I'm with you. If we're slapping huge tariffs on China and everybody else, where, let's face it, that is where we get the bulk of our building materials, it's going to make
Hmm.
it very, very expensive. And it's already
Yeah.
expensive. And
Forget
so
about new
it's
granite
all
counters.
right. Yeah, and because it's so expensive to build, they're not building for people who are your starting home buyers.
Right,
They're building
right.
for people who can afford $3 or $4 million homes, or,
Correct.
or much more.
Right. Well, and it's just logical. I mean, when you think about it, if it costs them that much more to build, they're
Yeah,
not going to limit their profit potential.
right. That's right.
So it's kind of a catch
Because even
22.
the cost of the land is very,
Hmm.
very expensive here where we
Right,
live, right? There just
right,
isn't, we're not expanding out and out and out. We're really infilling at this
right.
point. So it's expensive to buy it. And if you're going to build on it as a developer, I imagine you want the greatest return that you can get.
Although I was horrified to hear this morning in our office meeting about potentially opening up federal lands for housing.
Uh, yeah, I, let's go back to drilling in Alaska. I don't know. I mean, it's kind of nuts, right? But it depends. I guess it depends on where those federal lands are. If we want to go
Right.
down and grab some of those railroads in West Oakland, that seems like that's a good place to, you know, I wanted them to build a new stadium there. So
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like the we're in Gotham and all of Batman's enemies have taken over the
sure.
government.
That's a good analogy. There's your next article.
There you go. Anywho, so Out of curiosity, you moved companies. You're like me. You were at one place for a very long time and then you decided to change. What provoked you to change companies out of curiosity?
Well, I had hit basically the glass ceiling where I was, and they had sort of defined uh, where I was going to be and at what level I was going to be. And I felt at that point that I had earned my stripes and I was in a position to compete with anybody. And I wanted to compete again, openly and honestly. And they had protected farms and streets you couldn't advertise on. And it just was I felt a very outdated system in terms
Mm-hmm.
of farming.
Mm-hmm.
And by this time, Facebook had come along and Instagram had come along, and it didn't make sense that they really felt the blog was too familiar and too chatty, and we really disagreed about that. And I was also advertising online and via email flyers, and they thought that was all spam. And so we just differed. And
As in you were in the 21st century.
well, here's the thing. I really became the fly in the ointment. And finally, after a couple of years, I figured it wasn't my job to be the fly in the ointment. It was my job to get the hell out of the ointment, just fly away somewhere else.
Yeah.
And at that point, Compass had established itself, and it was just much more forward thinking and moving, and it did offer a lot of tech. And I will be the first to say that I'm not a tech genius. That's why we have a 25-year-old working for us. But I did recognize that that's really where advertising was going to go. And,
Mhm.
print advertising wasn't going to survive, and I don't believe it is going to survive. And so that's really what compelled me to move. And it was for me a great move.
Yeah, your business has taken off. You
Yeah.
guys you've established yourselves as the team in Piedmont, as far as I can tell.
Well, and I would say also teaming up with Sarah. I mean, Sarah and I used to compete a lot for listings, and then when
Mhm.
we put our talents together, we ended up getting all of those listings for the most part, instead
Right,
of having to sort of take from one another. I mean,
right,
just
right,
more to bring to
right.
the table.
Yeah, there are three people that I always come up against in listing appointments, and one of the three of us, well, one of the four of us, I should say, always gets it.
Yeah,
And you're right about that. It's kind of an interesting thing.
yeah,
Um, so in terms of prognosticating into 2025, as far as real estate in the specific area that you serve, what
yeah.
do you anticipate?
I think unfortunately it's going to be more of the same. I mean, I'd like it to be a little easier, frankly.
Hmm.
Been doing this for a long time, and you think it would get easier over time. And so to have it get more difficult has been interesting. I think the new commission structure has been challenging. I think the buyer representative agreements have been challenging. I understand the party talk is that, right? We get to establish our value. For me, it isn't difficult to define my value after 20 years of being in the
Right,
business, but there's something that just feels like that I'm in a position to have to define my value after
right,
20 years,
right.
fight for my value and fight for my commission and justify my commission. When we didn't really have to do that before, just
Hmm.
feels more challenging, and it is
Yep.
more challenging. And I think for buyers and sellers, I don't really see that interest rates are going to come down. It doesn't seem like they're going to come down. And if we're throwing tariffs into the mix and everybody gets more conservative around that, they're not going to come down in 2025. And so I think it's going to be 2024, a reboot of 2024, and perhaps even a little tougher because the incoming administration is anything but kind. And that's
Yeah,
seems sort of intent on just destroying everything. And so
absolutely.
now I'll be the first to tell you that in 2015, when people would say, when's the market going to change? And I would say, well, the market changes when fear comes into the marketplace. And so it would take
Mhm.
something crazy, like, I don't know, Trump getting elected. And then he got elected, and the markets actually responded really favorably to him in office.
Mhm.
And so I don't, what do I know? I guess I don't know enough, but it does typically take fear to change the marketplace, but not for the better, right? Usually for the worse. So we'll see what happens. I hope that the market holds. I'm hoping the market holds because it's been pretty robust in spite of
Our
inflation.
economy is robust. I just looked
Yeah.
today at Compass stock and it's gone up another $2.
Thank you. It's
Um, and so that's the thing. I think that a lot of the people who are well educated and sophisticated who actually still voted for Trump,
yeah,
um, were thinking in those kinds of terms. I have to say that during his last presidency, I did incredibly well.
yeah,
But at the same time, you've got people behind him now who want to rip apart every institution they come in contact with. And I don't think that he himself is that concerned about any of it. I don't think he cares. So I think that this lack of care that we experience, that trickles down. That's the only thing that's ever trickled down is the lack of care and concern and kindness. And the only way we can combat that is to be the change ourselves.
Yes.
You're a kind person. I'm a kind person. Most of the people I know in real estate are extremely kind, good people. As far as the commission thing is concerned, that's the whole reason I started this podcast, was because I felt that the problem is not that people don't respect what we do, it's that they don't know what we do. And so the podcast is, I'm really just bringing on people from every aspect of real estate life to show a general audience what all is involved, because it's highly complex. And Zillow can't just create a program where you push a button and buy a house. That is not going to happen. As long as housing stock is different, as long as there is weather, as long as there are fluctuations in the economy, as long as there are different people with different needs, you cannot take a real estate agent out of the equation. And so the good thing I think that's come out of the commission lawsuits is the buyer broker agreement, because it sort of forces a conversation. You and I have been in the business so long, we have no problem having those conversations with people. But younger agents who haven't ever had to put their value on the table, so to speak, are being forced to consider that and consider the amount of education that it's taken to get them to the place that they're at. So I actually feel really good about the buyer broker agreement. And I also have been actually upping what I request in commission on my listing agreements, because I figure as long as we're getting sandbagged by forces outside of our control, we should do everything that we can to prove our value everywhere we go. I just lost out on a rather major listing because I didn't want to go down below a 3% commission.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? If that's where somebody's at, it doesn't matter. There will be business for me elsewhere.
Well, you do. I mean, you do a tremendous amount of business. You do a tremendous amount of volume. And, I mean, I don't know of any agent that does as much volume as you do. So you've earned the right to say, hey, I'm worth 3%, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, part of this, I guess we could say, I'm worth more because I bring 20 years to bear. Am I worth the same as the guy who got his license last week? I hope not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's all about the experience and the education and the capability and the imagination and the creativity and the negotiating skills and the people skills that you have. And those are all things that are earned, not just givens.
Right.
And I find that you are the pinnacle of all of that. Thank you.
You are so kind, Andrea. Thank you very much. It's just, it's been a joy to work with you over the years, and I hope we'll have lots more business together.
Me too. So, Julie, if someone wants to find you, where can they find you?
They can find me at julie@juliegardner.com. They can find all of the blogs there as well, and before and afters and all that good stuff. And all of my contact information is there.
Excellent. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for being on Realizations Podcast.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Realizations Podcast. I hope our conversation has shed light on the true essence of real estate and the people behind it. As we wrap up, I want to extend my gratitude to our listeners for their support and engagement. Your feedback drives the heart of this podcast, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing to the Realizations podcast and leaving a review. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our message of positivity in the real estate industry. Until next time, remember to keep an open mind, embrace empathy, and always seek the good in every situation. I'm Andrea Gordon signing off from Realizations. See you next time.